She was 15 when her back curved like a question mark, and no one could answer why. Her eyes darted like a cornered animal's, her fingers twisted unnaturally, and her breath rattled, not from illness, but from birth. They said she was born wrong, but no one ever asked why. Most people don't believe in curses anymore, not the kind you pass down in blood, in marrow, in whispered family rituals behind closed cabin doors. But in a hidden pocket of Appalachia, deep in the hollows of West Virginia, a girl named Elsie was living proof that blood remembers, and blood punishes. Elsie's story isn't one of monsters. It's one of ordinary people, trapped in a cycle so ancient and broken that they forgot there was anything else. Her mother was her aunt. Her grandfather was also her father's brother. Her family tree wasn't a tree, it was a noose, tightening with each generation. Locals whispered that the family never left the mountain. They lived in the same rotting house for over 100 years. No schools, no hospitals, no visitors, just births, deaths, and silence. The kind of silence that weighs heavier than sound. When Elsie was born, her body was already losing. Her limbs were bent, her jaw underdeveloped. She couldn't speak until she was 7. She never learned to read. Her world was a series of grunts, glances, and rules that no outsider would ever understand. She didn't know what normal felt like, only what pain felt like, and to her, that was the same thing. The doctors who saw her, when she was dragged to the county hospital after falling down the front porch stairs, wrote things down in hushed horror. Craniofacial deformities, severe scoliosis, cognitive impairment. But they didn't write down the real diagnosis. She was the product of generations of incest, and yet, that wasn't even the darkest part. What Elsie believed about herself, what she was taught, was more disturbing than her body could ever show. They told her God made her special, that her twisted body was a mark of divine favor. Her uncle father would kneel by her bed at night, not to pray, but to remind her that the outside world was evil. That the world beyond the mountains would hate her, hurt her, and take her away. He said her pain meant she was chosen, that every ache in her spine was a holy sign that she belonged to them and to him. Elsie didn't question it. How could she? Pain was all she'd ever known. From the age of 4, her joints would swell for no reason. Her teeth came in black and crumbling, her bones fractured just from running too fast on the uneven cabin floor. But no one took her to a doctor. They gave her moonshine and whispered lullabies while she writhed. That was love in her family, quiet suffering together. The few times someone from the outside came near, like the state social worker who hiked up the mountain road after an anonymous tip, they were greeted with shotguns, snarls, and dead eyes. The report was filed, nothing was done. The family said Elsie was simple-minded, but loved dearly. The case was closed. But there were signs. There were screams in the woods at night, thin and high like a rabbit caught in wire. There were strange markings burned into the old barn's beams, symbols that no one could trace to any known language. There were animals born with 2 heads, and Elsie's family always smiled when they saw them. No school, no church, no law. The family made their own rules, rules that stretched back to a Civil War deserter who first settled the land in 1864, a man who married his cousin and told his children to do the same. Keep the blood strong, he said. But what they created was not strength. It was rot. And Elsie, she was its final bloom, not because of how she looked, but because of what they had planned for her. They called it the binding, a ceremony no outsider had ever seen and lived. They prepared her for it slowly, like boiling a frog, never all at once. First came the isolation. For weeks before the binding, they locked her in the smokehouse behind the main cabin. No windows, no light, just the sharp stink of meat long gone and the sound of her own breath echoing back at her. She was told this was tradition, that every girl before her had endured it, that it was cleansing. She believed them. She always believed them. They brought her food twice a day, raw potatoes, unwashed eggs, and cloudy water in an old mason jar. They said the taste of the earth would make her clean. They said pain flushed out the foreign thoughts, the ones that came when she looked too long at the mountains and wondered if life was different on the other side. By the 10th day, she was hearing voices, her own voice, talking back to her, louder than she'd ever heard it before. It asked her things she didn't know how to answer. "Why do you hurt?" it asked. "Why do they touch you like that? Why are you still here?" But just as quickly as they came, the voices were silenced because the door opened and her family came to bring her out. They wore white, not cotton or linen, animal hide stitched by hand, soaked in something that looked like rust. They didn't speak to her. They just hummed. That low, stomach-turning hum she'd heard since she was a baby, the one that always meant something bad was coming. She was led barefoot into the woods, deep past where even the game trails stopped. The trees there grew in warped circles, spiraling in ways that shouldn't be possible. In the center of it all, a stone slab, blackened with fire and time. Her grandfather, who was also her great-uncle, lifted her onto it. He didn't blink. Then the chanting began, and in that moment, in the flicker of firelight dancing across their twisted faces, Elsie realized something no child should ever have to realize. She wasn't a person to them. She was an offering. She lay still because stillness was survival, her arms pinned by hands that smelled of tobacco and rot, her legs numb from the cold stone. The humming deepened, almost mechanical now, like the sound of an old machine grinding itself into dust. Her family's mouths moved in unison, but not with words, just noise, rhythmic, rehearsed. And then came the blade. It wasn't a knife, not exactly. More like a sliver of metal chipped from an old farming tool, dulled by time but still sharp enough to draw blood. Her uncle-father pressed it to her chest, over her heart, and whispered, "This is where the old blood lives." That's what they believed, that her heart carried not just life, but memory, that through inbreeding, the spirits of their ancestors could live on, undiluted, forever. To them, Elsie wasn't broken. She was pure. The final vessel. The culmination of 100 years of intentional incest, rituals, and rejection of the outside world. The blade pressed down. But it didn't break the skin. Not yet. It just lingered, trembling slightly in his shaking hand. She could feel him hesitate. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe, deep inside, he realized the line had been crossed long before this moment. Elsie didn't scream, not out loud, but something inside her snapped, not like a twig, but like a chain, rusted and long forgotten. Her breath slowed, her eyes met his, and in that second, something terrifying happened. She smiled, not because she liked it, but because she finally understood. Her pain wasn't special. It wasn't holy. It wasn't part of some ancient plan. It was a lie. Everything was a lie. The God they prayed to in secret. The rules they said were sacred. The purity they obsessed over. It was all a way to control her, to keep her broken, to keep her quiet. And in that realization, a new kind of pain bloomed inside her, not from fear, but rage. Cold, old rage, older than her bones, older than the family itself. She wasn't going to be the offering, not anymore. She bolted. Before the blade could fall, before their chants reached their crescendo, Elsie twisted, hard. A sharp crunch erupted from her shoulder as it dislocated, but she didn't stop. She used the pain. It cleared her mind like fire through underbrush. She slid from the slab and hit the forest floor running, one arm limp at her side, feet bleeding on the jagged roots. Behind her, the chanting shattered into chaos. They called after her, not by name, but by the word they always used when she disobeyed, filth. Their footsteps crashed through the brush, animal-like, driven by generations of entitlement. because no one had ever run before, not in 100 years. But Elsie was different. The pain that had once kept her quiet was now her weapon. Every burning breath reminded her she was still alive, that she wasn't just a bloodline, she was a girl, a human being, and she didn't care if she bled to death in the woods, as long as she died free. The moon was full that night. It lit the forest in silver as she stumbled down a ravine and into the dry bed of a forgotten creek. For hours she walked, then crawled, then dragged herself through the thick mud and thorns. She didn't sleep. She didn't cry. She couldn't afford to. By dawn, her face was swollen, her fingers purple, her lips cracked with dehydration, but she kept moving. It wasn't until the third day that she saw the highway. A 2-lane stretch of cracked asphalt with only one car passing every 30 minutes. She threw herself onto the shoulder, waving her good arm, mouth too dry to speak. The truck didn't stop. The second one didn't either. The third driver was a woman, a nurse on her way to work. She pulled over, stepped out, took one look at Elsie, and burst into tears. Elsie passed out in her arms. They said later that her blood work was unlike anything they'd seen. Multiple genetic disorders, bone degradation, severe malnutrition. But what shook the hospital staff most wasn't her condition, it was her silence. She didn't speak for weeks, and when she finally did, her first words were, "I thought everyone lived like that. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline?" They placed her in a group home 3 counties away under a new name, with a carefully worded file that avoided the word incest. The doctors called it trauma-induced developmental delay. The social workers used terms like neglect and abuse, but none of them could bring themselves to name what really happened, because naming it would mean admitting it had been allowed to happen, that for over a century no one stopped it. Elsie didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just watched, always watching, like an animal fresh from the trap, half dead, half alive, waiting for someone to finish the job. She struggled with basic things: how to hold a spoon, how to sit in a chair without flinching, how to sleep in a bed without expecting someone to come in during the night. One therapist said her brain had been rewired by survival, that she didn't understand comfort because her nervous system never learned what safety felt like. But slowly, so slowly it hurt, she began to change. One of the aides, a woman in her 60s who'd grown up nearby, started reading to her, old fairy tales from a battered book with soft pages, and it was those stories, not medicine, not therapy, that first made Elsie speak again. She would ask questions in a voice so quiet you had to lean in to hear it. Why didn't the girl run away sooner? Why didn't the witch love the children? Did the monster ever stop hurting them? And every time she asked, the aide answered the same way. Because no one ever told her she could leave. Elsie began writing, first with drawings, stick figures, dark forests, girls with broken arms and glowing eyes, then with single words: blood, God, rot. But eventually the words formed sentences, and then stories. Not about herself, not yet, but about girls who escaped, girls who burned down the houses behind them, girls who survived. Still, no one knew how deep it went, how many others had suffered up there on the mountain. When the state finally investigated, they found the house abandoned, furniture gone, bloodstains on the walls, a fire pit still smoldering, no bodies, no footprints, just silence. The family had vanished, like ghosts pulling the earth in after them. And Elsie? She never asked where they went. She just said, "They'll come back when they find someone weaker than me." Years passed. Elsie grew taller, though her spine remained curved. Her face still bore the marks of her birth, the asymmetry, the deep-set eyes, the jaw that never fully developed. But there was a presence behind her gaze now, something unspoken, not just survival, but defiance. She never returned to the mountains, never asked to, but she kept a notebook under her pillow, always locked, always close, and in it she documented everything she remembered, The faces, the rituals, the binding, the names they gave themselves and the ones they stole from others. Her memory was fractured, yes, but she remembered enough to make it dangerous. A journalist eventually found her, not by name, hers had been changed by then, but through a tip from a former caseworker. He came gently, cautiously, with empathy in his eyes, said he was doing a series on forgotten children. But as soon as he opened his recorder and asked about her family, Elsie stood up and walked out of the room. Later, she left him a note. It said, "They weren't forgotten. You all just chose to look away." The story never ran. The world wanted monsters in cages, not monsters in cabins. It wanted evil to look obvious, to wear masks, to lurk in alleys, to flash red lights. It didn't want to see evil woven into bloodlines, passed down like heirlooms, hidden behind Bibles and family portraits. Elsie eventually got a job at a shelter for girls like her, girls who didn't scream anymore, girls who had learned how to vanish in plain sight. She didn't talk about her past, not even to them, but they trusted her, because broken recognizes broken, and survivors speak a language that doesn't need words. One night, a girl arrived at the shelter with bruises in the shape of fingerprints and eyes full of frozen fire. Elsie watched her sleep on the cot, then she sat at the desk and opened her old notebook, and for the first time, she wrote her real name at the top of a page, not the name the state gave her, not the one her family used. Her own, a name no one had ever spoken before, a name she chose, because she wasn't just the product of pain anymore. She was the witness, the survivor, and the last chapter of a bloodline that never should have existed.